Before I get into the presentation, I wanted to share a little bit about my background. I'm a farm kid originally from Western New York. I grew up and worked on a dairy farm in Western New York. I grew up and worked on that dairy farm with my grandfather, who founded the dairy in 1955. I was his buddy going to auctions. I grew up and worked on that dairy farm with my father, who's very active in his co-op in Western New York. I grew up and worked on that dairy farm with my brother, who's now a junior partner on the dairy farm. I grew up and worked on that dairy farm with my brother, who's a food scientist at Chobani. And I now have a sister-in-law who's in the process of trying to build a market, a premium market for dairy beef. And now my wife works with me, smart enough to marry a Southern girl, in my business where I work with primarily manufacturers and buyers on dairy supply chain issues. So I was asked by Stan to, and a consortium of producer groups. And Stan, before I begin, could we thank all those that funded this study?
Sure.
Yeah, you'll have to help me with all of them.
Let's start with our association. Our board made a commitment to move forward with it. And if I remember correctly, the board said, hey, if you can approach other associations and help with doing that, then that would be great. And so I contacted H. Barlow at KDDC. They were one of the first to commit. Georgia, milk producers, Newberry, Georgia, and Kentucky, and North Carolina, and Virginia, Ag Boston, and so those are the 5 states that are involved in the white paper. And so we've had several meetings. We're going to try to do what you probably want to present for us and identify issues that affect the Southeast. And so we appreciate all of those who have been involved. Let me also recognize Tennessee Farm Bureau for stepping up, as well as the Department of Agriculture, and allowing us to use some of our association funds for what they consider education research when it comes to this paper. So the whole team is pulled together to address concerns about our industry in the state and in the Southeast. And as I'm standing here, the lady slipped in, Celeste Blackman, who is the president of Tennessee ADA. And let me comment that at this meeting yesterday, I had more hope about the future of promotion of fluid milk from the dairy. So with that, how about it?
Okay, thanks, Dan. Now for me, the Southeast, the Appalachian region is on this project, it's fairly new for me. I lived in Wisconsin, I lived in Philadelphia for a decade, and now back in Western New York. And so meeting the personalities, for example, was new to me. I have to say that one of the things that I was disappointed in my conversations is that the term I've come up with is the fatalist attitude that many in the industry have about the declining fluid milk sales and the declining dairy economy of this greater region. I can't tell you the number of conversations that I had where people treated it like, well, this is what's happened and this is what's going to happen. I had very few conversations about how are we going to revitalize the dairy economy and how are we going to return the industry to growth. Instead, in my conversations, there's a lot of lamenting about what has happened. So I'm hopeful that this presentation will be part of changing that conversation from declining fluid milk sales to, well, actually there's opportunity here and there's potential growth, and I'm going to go through that in the presentation. There's I believe the potential to go and actually grow the industry here. I think that our industry here in the Southeast and the Appalachian region has declined further than the demand. There's actually opportunity to meet what is now unmet, or I believe is unmet demand. And as part of that, return premiums back to milk checks and improve the overall farm economy. Now, I originally wanted to title this presentation, "Don't Believe the Naysayers," because there's a lot of them. So as we go through the presentation today, the first part, I'm going to go and just talk about the study itself. And then I'm going to, the study was a 43-page report. I'm going to just go through the 5 key highlights. And then we're going to end the presentation with what I think the next step should be. Now, this is what I think the next step should be. This is not a dictate. It's not a mandate. Just my perspective. So to start with the study.
There you go.
Okay.
Matt, can you stand a little bit closer so I can make sure that they can actually hear you?
Sure.
We can move this out of the way. They're definitely going to hear that.
So the purpose of the study was a fact-finding mission, due diligence. What did the industry think was going to happen 20 years ago? And then what happened over the last 20 years? I was given the mandate to report the facts, to not have a preconceived notion or story that I wanted to write. That's part of why I was brought in from not the region, kind of have a fresh perspective, to not be indoctrinated with the common thinking, so to speak. And so I've done my best to try and do that. A fair description of what's happened. The research process, I talked to industry practitioners. I combed through all publicly available data sources and worked pretty closely with the different federal milk marketing orders. And then I put pencil to paper, more realistically, keyboard to Excel sheet, and that's how this study got written. The deliverable was a 43-page report. It's quite dense. One of my optimistic goals early on in the study was to explain how federal orders work in easy-to-read terminology. I did my best. I don't think all of you will find it easy to read. And that's the reality of federal orders. And there's a humbleness and a respect in that. Is that federal orders is the kind of thing like Ernie Yates has learned to become an expert in over a lifetime. It's not the kind of thing where you can sit down and read a 43-page report and come to appreciate all of its nuances. But that doesn't mean that it's not important, and it doesn't mean that they don't affect you in a very material way. And we're going to talk through them. All right. Now, instead of reading the 43-page report, I'm going to go with the 5 top insights. When I talk about these insights, I'm going to break it down into 2 regions. We have the Southeast order and the Appalachian order. Of course, Tennessee is split between the 2. Eastern Tennessee being in the Appalachian, Western Middle Tennessee being in the Southeast order. Now, the insights, I think, for the general, I'll break them out by the different regions, but I think they hold true generally speaking. And the 5 key findings. Several of them are no-does, but it's about it's a fact finding, due diligence, putting numbers to it. What is it actually? So the first one, Farmgate compensation has declined. It peaked about 10 years ago, and I'll get into that. I have 1 slide or so for each one of these. 2, there's evidence that surplus milk from outside the region is suppressing the Farmgate compensation. 3, milk production in the Southeast has fallen far faster than fluid milk sales have declined. When you have conversations with folks, the line that everyone says is the decline in milk production is because of the decline in fluid milk sales. Well, the evidence doesn't support that. The magnitude of the milk sales loss has exceeded the loss in fluid milk sales, which has a promising aspect of, well, that suggests there's room for growth to backfill where the industry is corrected too far. Consolidation in the region has outpaced national averages. I mean, if you guys are in Tennessee, you guys have lost more than 80% of your industry in the last 20 years. 80% of the farms have gone out of business. Nationally, the number is closer to 2/3. And then last but not least, in the southeastern region, if you look at where the milk is on the order, is that over the last 20 years, it's moved further away. And from an economic pure rationality point of view, that is surprising, and I think also problematic. So we're going to go through each one of these. Now there's two points I want to make. The first is that there's no such thing as a silver bullet. You can't fix one issue and have it fix everything. So if you come to with a proposal, you are already inadequate. Because it's not one thing that is going on. The second is that if you take these issues and you flip them around, they can be your beacons on where you should be focusing your efforts. How do we increase Farmgate compensation? How do we decrease surplus milk from being in the region and suppressing prices? How do we get milk production to increase, or at least to fall less fast as fluid milk sales, and try to close that gap? How do we cause consolidation to be below average? And how do we get more milk produced locally as part of our order pool? So we're going to go through each one of these, but we're gonna start with kind of what I a little bit complained about in the beginning, where we're going to talk about what has been. But then after we get through what has been, and we're going to get through what has been, what's next is all about reversing these. So here's the Farmgate compensation. I was trying my best to stick to one slide. It didn't quite make it. But on this one, I stuck with one slide. It shows mailbox milk prices, and I defined compensation based on how much more did you get paid than other regions. In the Appalachian region, you got paid around 2010, somewhere around north of $1.50 more than the federal order average. Fast forward 10 years, and you're nearly even with the federal order average. The Southeast is similar, where the last decade has resulted in about a $2 per hundredweight decrease in compensation. Okay, key insight 2, surplus milk from outside areas has wagged negatively on that compensation. This chart shows the milk dumping in Federal Order 1 in the Mideast order. You can see the pickup in milk dumping. I'm using it as a proxy for the surplus milk. And you can see the decrease in compensation that happened in that time frame. Key insight 3, the data doesn't support the notion that the decline in fluid milk sales is the cause of the decline in the overall industry. In the Southeast, milk production has decreased by more than 4 billion pounds. And you compare that to fluid milk consumption, it's only down by 1.1 billion. The magnitude of loss of the industry is basically 4x the loss of fluid milk sales. In the Appalachian region, it's more even. 543 million pounds estimated loss in fluid milk consumption, 652 million pounds loss in production. So, as I stated earlier, the opportunity is here. How do we close that gap? Because I think this is probably the most important insight, fluid milk demand has decreased by 15% in the Southeast. Milk production is decreased by 37%. So if there's something that looks like a problem that's worth addressing, this is it. Key insight 4, the dairy industry in the Appalachian Southeast regions have decreased far faster than the national averages. This is the number of farms. Tennessee is here, lost 88% of the farms. You can look at states like Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi that have had their dairy industries totally decimated over the last 2 decades, nearly completely eliminated. And then here is the last key insight, and I'm going to just kind of step back here. It shows where milk production has moved over time. And so each chart shows the percentage of milk production by county in the order. This is the Appalachian region. You can see how, here we're getting back to, we went from fewer farms, and over time we have fewer larger, producing counties that make up the area. But it looks, that's nothing new, economies of scale, I don't think there's anything surprising there. When you look at the Southeast order, I want you to pay particular attention to Eastern Texas and the milk migrating to Western Texas. And I want you to pay attention to the milk in Eastern here moving west. That seems like a less than optimal economic outcome where you're favoring milk that was in Eastern Texas. Now you're pursuing milk that's across the entire Lone Star State away. So these were the 5 key findings from the study. You didn't have to read the 43 pages, but they also are the 3 key findings that I think there's room to address. Now, the one thing that everyone says in the industry, the practitioners, is that, well, we can't grow milk production here because when we're at our high, fluid milk sales are at their low, and that's the reason why we can't grow. And so I added up the share of milk pooled in the Southeast order over time, and you can see that it peaked here in 2014-15. We're nowhere near where we were in 2000. So if we can draw this line back up, get back to where we were as a percentage share, I believe there's opportunity. And I reject the notion that it's impossible to change. And I want you guys to reject the notion, the fatalistic notion, that there's no opportunity for growth. Because this looks like growth on the order of, I estimate conservatively 2 billion pounds. That's 100,000 cows of growth. So those were the 5 key findings. The Farmgate compensation has declined. Surplus milk production in the Southeast has fallen faster than fluid milk sales. Consolidation has outpaced national averages, and milk in the Southeast region has migrated further away. Now, again, I'm going to restate it as I did earlier. I think they need to be your 5 key priorities. How do we increase Farmgate compensation? How do we decrease surplus milk from outside the region? How do we increase milk production faster than we're losing fluid milk sales? How do we reverse cause consolidation? I don't know. I think reversing it could be that would be quite monumental. But at least, how do you get consolidation that's below average? And how do we get more local milk in our southeastern order? So now here's what's next. So we did the due diligence. This is the due diligence. The next step is as an industry, and I think Stan's already played a large role in this, but getting the different stakeholders together as we have today, need to identify priority issues. And then my next recommendation is to select a vetted team to develop policy proposals and initiatives. Now, this is something that I want to kind of touch on as a challenge. I'm sure you guys have all heard the joke, how many people in the world understand federal orders? And it's, there's 5 of them and 3 of them are dead. And that's an exaggeration, but there's truth to it. And that there isn't there's not a huge pool to pick from. It's not big in the first place. So I have that as a circle. Now another circle, which also isn't very big, is this: professionals that are able and interested to fully advocate for producers in the Southeast. One of the realities is there's not very many of you. And the organizations that you would normally go to represent your interests, you might be a minority of, or they might have opposing interests. I mean, you could imagine teaming up with an organization that also is representing producers in Western Texas, and their interests are opposed to yours. So trying to have professionals that are able to fully advocate for your interests, well, that's another circle. And the hard part and the challenge is to find the people that can do both. And I issue it as a warning, is that there's lots of people who will tell you they have the technical knowledge. And there's a lot of people that say that they will advocate for your interests, but they need to be vetted because, and that's just a reality. And I think that's important to understand and appreciate We started off with, well, federal orders are complicated. That means that Joe Schmo can't be the person working on it, but also they have to be able to represent your specific interests, which may not be national interests. It may not be, the interest of you in California. You have to be selected. So that's my recommendation. Again, it's not a dictate. It's not a mandate. It's my recommendation. I think we have done the due diligence. We've identified priorities that I think are worth pursuing. As an industry, you have to come and coalesce and agree. And then I recommend probably choosing someone that you respect to go and try and put together that team. Okay, so can you click on that?
Yeah, sorry.
All right, so that's kind of the presentation. So now questions. I think we got a fair bit of time.
And anyone online, if you have a question for us, just throw it into the Q&A and I'll relay it to Matt.
Yep.
Matt, am I correct to say over the last 20 years, through our federal order system and through our marketing system, through our co-ops, we've transferred dollars from folks located in dairy farmers located in the southern geographic area, those orders areas, to farmers outside the area to subsidize the hauling of milk coming in?
I'm going to try and reword your question. I'm going to reword your question as, has the share of the milk in the order declined? Is that kind of the question?
Are farmers in the geographic order, geographic area,
Yep.
subsidizing the hauling of milk brought into the order from outside the geographic area through the federal order system and through our co-op system? We're transferring dollars.
Yeah, so there is a transportation credit system, which is paid. It's in a sense, it's a class 1 differential that the processor pays, that instead of being made available to the whole pool, is only made available to milk outside the order. And that's an issue. That's a lightning rod issue. I think probably me bringing up transportation credits caused several of you to shiver. And it's also an issue about dealing with the cost of balancing what is a deficit market. So one of the features of the transportation credit system, I think it's is that if you look at it, the way that it works is it pays a fixed rate per mile. And so if you are, say, 800 miles away, and you have another, it might be more economical to bring milk from 900 miles away because the cost on a per mile basis is advantageous. So you may get things like some of these distortions. But that's the ramifications of transportation credits or of these pooling rules are very complex. And so I don't want to say that I can say, oh, well, if you got rid of transportation credits, X would happen. There's a lot of things that would happen. They're all connected. And so, but to your point, the transportation credits are one of the things that does exist. Yeah.
Well, let me jump in here just a minute. And we've never met before, but I've enjoyed your remarks and I enjoy reading your newsletter every week too. Like the way you think about things.
I appreciate that.
I think the quick answer to your question, the best answer, the most accurate answer, no. Okay. So the transportation credits are funded through assessments to the processor. So technically the processors are paying into the fund. When the fund runs out, there's no money taken out of the pool or from individual dairy farmers to pay. So the way you asked the question, I think it's not true. That's not happening.
But if that money wasn't going into the pool, the transportation credits, that the processor would have that money available to pay premiums to our farmers, or to use that money somewhere else.
So when the transportation credits were added on, the premiums didn't go down. So it was additional money that processors paid into the P credit pool to pay for this transportation.
But long term, the premiums did go down.
Yes.
Officially, I mean, there are other factors, a lot of other factors.
But you're right. There's a lot of other factors.
A lot of factors.
Hey, Matt, why don't you describe to us what TouchBase requirements, give it the same, fonts that Steve said on, T-Credit, what TouchBase requirements do?
Matt, can you do me a favor and restate the question because they can't hear
Oh,
the
okay.
questions coming from their
So
end?
the question, sorry, we have to reset it for Zoom. The question is on touch-based requirements. You know, what role does that play in impacting how producers are paid in the region? Is that a correct synopsis of your question, Nate? So the way that touch-based requirements are also called performance provisions, or are part of the performance provisions. They're what you have to do to be part of the pool, and then you get to draw money out of the pool. Performance provisions broadly, not just touch-based, but broadly performance provisions, but touch-based also, vary depending on the order. They're different in different places. And in the Southeast, you have touch-based provisions, and you can move them up, which is the amount of times you have to bring milk to a plant. And you can move them up or you can move them down. You can make it easier to qualify milk on an order, like in the Midwest. If you touch base once, you are part of the pool until you say not. And you can imagine having a touch base requirement that said you are only part of the pool. The most extreme would be if you just took milk to a fluid milk plant. So touch base provisions are similar in how we're talking about transportation credits, is you can move them and they have effects that, depending on who you are in your situation, can increase or decrease your pay price. Now, the idea that you're going to solve any of these issues with, well, if only we changed touch base, or if only we got rid of transportation credits, are, one, they're complicated, and the ramifications are complicated. I mean, you probably could get into a day-long debate about whether or not transportation credits bring in milk or actually fairly compensate for milk being brought in, and who ends up bearing that. Same thing with touch base. Who's going to pay to balance the plants? And how much reserve supply do you need to balance the plants? And as an approach to saying, oh, well, we should find the right touch base requirement, or we should find the right level of transportation credits, I really don't feel that that's the question that should be decided at farm level. You guys should be managing the people who are in the room, who can work through all the complexities of it to a very high level.
So we're not managing those people at high levels that are in that room. We're not doing that.
That is currently not occurring at the moment. Is that with the conversation, I feel.
Hey, we don't want these guys managing those people in the room, okay? Hey, but both of you, so both of you, you hit the target, right? What you want to do is hit the bullseye. And, so it's not touch base, okay? If you were really managing the supply chain. But, but it's probably close, right? The diversion thing is, why touch base if you don't get any diversions? There's no need to touch base, right? So, you get T credits, that's okay. It pays part of the freight, doesn't pay all the freight. The other thing is, what's the option? I loved your chart that showed how much milk was being dumped in order 1 and order 33. Hey, listen, if we used to pay give up charges to those guys up there, they'd hold us hostage, for milk. And now, then they call up and say, hey, instead of me having to dump this load of milk, I'll bring it down there and sell it to you for just federal order price. And I'll pay you, you can pay me less than that if you can figure out how to get around the federal order requirements. I mean, that's what's happening. And that new cheese plant up in Michigan, was a hope of keeping a lot of that milk at home. Now sort of what's happening is those producers feel like there's a base excess program getting ready to be implemented, and they're building up their production, so they increase their production to offset the good that new cheese plant did, or about that. But I think in the long run, that new cheese plant's going to make a huge difference for the Southeast.
But already back in those years when you had to pay that big give up charge for milk coming out east, a lot of it's the east back then, some of it Midwest. You had to give that big give up charge. We were getting a lot more competitive price for our milk down here. And we had a lot more milk here then, percentage wise. We had a lot of milk here, more than we do today. And we got more for our milk. And you had to run out and grab a little bit of that milk occasionally and pay a big high price for it. But we were better off.
What do you mean that you got a more competitive price?
Well, we had a higher at the farm price compared to the rest of the country than we did today, 20 years ago.
I tell you what we did, I think, is, the co-ops are the ones that keep this whole supply chain thing going, right? And unfortunately, some of us that weren't with the co-op at the time, we had a few independent producers. And we, but hey, it's a little bit good, a little bit more better. And as we took on and grew the independent supply, we pushed the balancing cost back on the co-ops. Don't be shaking your head. I think I better just agree. Just agree. But, and the darn thing about it, we just kept doing it and kept doing it until, but the darn fluid companies went bankrupt, and now this whole thing's gotten reset. And it's more than just a coincidence that the pay prices have been significantly better since last May, because now we're managing the supply chain as more or less one supply chain and not, taking advantage of some opportunity to, buy milk in from outside and share the diversions, and get some money back. And, that part of the game, has sort of played itself out. And so, we haven't, we've just seen like 10 months of this new way of managing the supply chain. It's, it's interesting to see how it would continue to play out because, if Brent's over there, he knows this better than I do, but, it's a combination of T credits, diversions. It's all fine as long as you just use enough of it to bring the milk in and not go overboard, in my opinion.
Hey, Arnie, go ahead. I think I said this to you once before, we're sharing with folks the 2019 pay prices for the year. And Appalachian orders the ninth. We used to, we were always third, I guess, or, you had Florida first, Southeast second, Appalachian third. This new management thing, and I've really never gotten a good answer why we dropped from second and third to ninth across the country. But, so you're saying this new management system of what supplies and concentrated is going to change that, we're going to be, when I'm getting paid less for milk than the people in Wisconsin or New York, that's never been that way in my lifetime, and I've been in it a long time.
Well, there's two things there. So first of all, I say yes, unless cheese goes up to $3, then you're in this other conversation about the guys in Wisconsin, they're 90% class 3, so they're still going to have a higher, those particular months, they're going to have a higher mailbox price. So that changes the equation.
Yeah, if you were to say it differently, it's if you had the higher of, would you have been third in the country?
Yeah.
And probably the answer is yeah.
Let's reset the question. Let's go back and ask,
Yep.
Would those large milk sheds have built up in the Panhandle of Texas and Western Texas had there not been dollars that those milk sheds could attach and move that milk?
Yeah, I think that would have happened, didn't it?
That would love it.
Yeah, they would have grown anyway.
You think that would have happened anyway?
Yeah. I mean, those guys are crazy out there. I don't know if anybody's in them, but back in the mid-90s, about a dozen of us went out to New Mexico just because we heard of this, and it was just the darndest thing. I mean, they're got a 3,500 cow operation, and he's saying, you know what? this thing's running so nice, I'm gonna put another one right there. You know, and then another one right there. And they somehow or another, I grew up on a 40 cow dairy farm, okay? And if we went from 40 to 45, it was a big deal. But there's, and some of you guys are bigger, you know, but these guys just, I mean, they can produce more milk.
But they did it knowing. These guys did that knowing their milk would have to move 1,000 miles.
And they still did it,
And
so
they
that's
still
what I'm
did it.
saying.
But
Yeah,
they had to know there's not, to me, it's a clear picture for them. They knew they could get help moving.
that much milk came east for those guys. That much. Look, compared to what they have out there, I mean, this much.
A lot of what happened out there.
Front row's the cell phone row, apparently.
Building those facilities are so much cheaper. So they was much cheaper. And do a lot of hard work in marketing. Somebody, yeah.
Well, they're, you know,
Always class one is in marketing.
yeah, their market is class 3 and class 4.
I got a question.
Yep.
So you look around this room, and you look at the ancient people in this room.
Yep.
I don't think nobody's here knows. But, so think about, you're talking about this growth. And you go back to all your farms, and I know in my county, in the last 20 years, it went from 37 dairies to 2.
Yep.
Ain't no way to bring production. Because everybody's telling their kids, son, go get a job and leave. Don't come back here.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that perspective. If you looked at the average age of dairy farmers in Western New York, you guys could switch all of you out and replace them with Western New York dairymen and I mean, besides the accent, wouldn't know the difference. My accent, of course. The way that I have seen growth in the industry has been a lot less of the add 5 cows and a lot more of the build the 3,500 cow dairy. And for my whole life, I have heard farmers, and I mean, obviously there's truth to this. I mean, you can look at the map of the consolidation.
Sorry, I stole it again.
You know,
So when you're trying to do everything from the same computer, you keep stealing the
I mean,
pointer.
you can look at the map of the consolidation. There's 2/3 fewer farmers in the last 20 years. And if you look at, and that's what it is nationally, and you look at the milk supply, and it's up 30%. 2/3 less farms, 30% more milk. So I hear what you're saying. I'm not a believer in that. Again, I don't see it from those eyes. I see that there's an opportunity, and if the pay price ever got high enough, maybe it isn't everyone raises their hand and says, I want to build, but all you need is 1 or 2.
Hey, man, when you were talking about the fluid milk, you know, has come down some, finished product. Did you account for milk coming in from outside of the area?
So I'll show, this is so I estimated, this is how I came up with these numbers. I took per capita consumption based off population by county. And so that's how I had, so, you know, there's been a pretty good population growth around here. And I was in Nashville 5 years ago, and Nashville today, holy cow, things are just, you know, and where I'm from in Western New York, this is where people move here, people move to South Carolina, people move to Georgia. You know, I'm from a less favorable state and all this. So that's why per capita consumption has been decreasing forever. What we hit as a nation around 2008 or 2009 was total fluid milk sales started declining. That was a big deal. So the loss in total fluid milk sales meant all of a sudden as a nation, we had more fluid milk manufacturing capacity than we had sales. As a region, you guys have benefited from population growth, which has offset that somewhat. Me in New York, the population growth is nothing. And so when fluid milk sales decline, that directly translates into less milk sales. So sorry, what was your original question?
Well, in addition to having farm milk come in from outside of there, we also have finished product. that comes in from outside the area too.
Yeah, I had these on previous slides. For the sake of simplicity, I didn't include it. One of the things that's happening is there's milk coming in from Federal Order 33, finished good milk. If you look at the total finished good milk that's being sold in the Appalachian and Southeast areas, the total is about 1 billion pounds. So that's 50,000 cows worth of fluid milk that's being brought in. And I didn't include it in these 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 key insights. I kind of grouped it in with probably has something to do with that surplus milk. But there's 1 billion pounds there of milk that is finished good milk, meaning that it's manufactured, put in a stackable jug and brought in. That's about 1 billion pounds. And that's not, so if you wanted to throw in here this change in fluid milk consumption, if you want to make it change in local fluid milk sales, it might be something like minus 2 billion pounds.
And
That's still a 2 to 1,
I want to ask you this question before we run out of time. So great insights. It's a sort of here's what's happened kind of deal. If we go to a federal order hearing, so what's the ask?
Well, this is my ask, which is the next step is to have the formal asks. We're not there yet. Right now, we're at this stage. I mean, I was originally brought in to fact find. I wasn't brought in to tell a story or to advocate a policy. It was to say, is there problems here that we can address and fix? I got 5 of them. I think you need sophisticated solutions. You don't need silver bullet solutions. Silver bullet solutions won't work. You need sophisticated solutions, and that's how you get to my final recommendation, which is a team of folks that favor that science requirement.
Hey, Matt, one more question, if I've got time.
Go ahead.
There's, so fluid milk is only representing between 30 and 40% of total dairy consumption today. We have population growth in the southeast.
Yep.
And so that means 60% of our milk, well, take out 15 or 16% goes to exports. We have more than half of our milk that's consumed in the south is in manufactured dairy products of some form.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the potential of us having some manufacturing put into the south to capture some of that instead of us bringing in all of that manufactured product from out of the region?
Right. This is what I feel like becomes the mirage of the low-hanging fruit. Clearly, you guys should build yogurt, cheese, and butter capacity, right? Consumption's up. Stay out of ice cream and fluid milk. I just talked about 1 billion pounds of milk coming in that was fluid. This is the product that you guys can produce cheaper just because of the cost of hauling it in. You talked about, I have customers, milk 10,000 cows in Clovis. You can't compete with that. You can't make commodity grade cheese and compete and win. You can't make commodity grade mozzarella and compete and win. What you need is a product that has a super high level of moisture, 87% is good, and the cost of transportation is what makes it your market. And within the order pool, the percentage of milk processed into class 1, it's higher than 50. It's 70 something. And this is a fluid milk market. And the low hanging fruit for me is this. That's the low hanging fruit. It's not trying to attract a plant that can pay class 3 minus 50 so that you guys can all look at a plant as you go out of business.
So Matt, we have a couple questions online, and I know we're running short on time, but I just want to make sure that they get answered. Did you have a total dollar amount paid in transportation credits to bring in outside milk, or even an estimate?
Yeah, I don't have that number. No.
Okay. And then next question is, do you believe condensing units in our state would be a benefit?
What?
condensing units in our state would be a benefit.
Condensing plant,
Yep, to service that really large yogurt plant we have in Tennessee.
same situation that he just addressed.
Mhm.
Yeah, you're not gonna make money condensing yogurt or condensing milk. The question is, can you, can more condensing capacity basically help you lower balancing costs? It's kind of the question. From what I understand is, that this is a fluid milk market. This isn't a market that builds, is a major exporting market. So, future's fluid milk.
Okay. No more questions online.
But thank you.
I can interject one other comment about that is that for the last 2 or 3 years, we've been working with Yoplait, who's the largest yogurt producer, not in the southeast, but in the nation probably. And they recognize that same thing, from the amount of milk that's here and the amount of milk, it doesn't add up. The dollars don't add up. So to address H's question as well as what Matt just said, then our objective needs to be from a producer standpoint to focus on how we can recapture our fluid milk market. Is that not the bottom line?
That's the bottom line.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Appreciate